Welcome to another edition of Louder with Ace. So today I thought that we would revisit a topic we've talked about a little bit in the past before, but in my experience, there are two forms of entertainment that really walk hand in hand, and that's comedy and rock and roll. There are a few comedians I have met who didn't want to be rock stars, and a whole lot of rock stars who thought they were funny, at least. But I'm lucky enough to be friends with one of the most rock and roll comedians out there. I'd like to welcome to the show Don Jamieson.
That's a great intro, man. I appreciate that. And it's true, Ace. When I go out and do this stuff with the bands, they all want to do my job and I want to do their job. So we both kind of get the best of both worlds.
Well, you're such a rock star in your own right that your comedy albums come out on a metal label.
Yeah, Metal Blade Records. It's just, that really is. It's one of the so many connections I've made with the rock and comedy worlds in my life. But it really started when I was like 11, when my first two albums were Kiss Destroyer and George Carlin, Occupation Fool. I didn't know then that was going to follow me my whole life, but I'm glad it has.
Oh, for sure. I mean, you even get this juxtaposition where a number of times comedians are the opening acts for rock bands. I mean, you've even done that with one of my artists, with Black Star Riders in the past.
Yeah, I'm going to jump on the bus with them again next month for a week.
Nice.
To revisit the old anniversary of going out with them. I guess they're celebrating 10 years, which is awesome. And, obviously I'm drinking out of the Philo mug today, being the Lizzie maniac I am. And I was like, yeah, I got to go back out and have Scott Gorham call me John Jamieson for another week.
Oh, well, don't feel bad. I mean, when we had Tom Hamilton playing bass in the band, he could never get his name right after I don't know how many months of playing with him. So,
well, I think he once he learned my name, he just did it to break my nuts. But that's the thing, man. It's like for a comedian, it's a solitary thing unless you're a comedy duo, which there's not a lot of those. But it's a solitary job. It's me and a microphone, and that's it, And I like to work with my friends as much as I can, but sometimes you go out of town for a weekend and you're working with people you don't know, and it's still fun. But the advantage I've made for myself is I can get out and go on a bus with a band and tour with them and open for them as direct support. So I get all the brotherhood of being in the band, but I don't get any of the drama. I don't lug equipment. I don't have to split the money 5 ways. I just put my dirty jokes in my pocket and I go.
Well, I mean, before we get into our conversation about rock and roll comedians in general, I wanted to ask you a few questions, because between you and, Jim Florentine's also a very successful stand-up, but you guys combined with Eddie Trunk brought to the music world one of the most metal shows ever made. I mean, it was called That Metal Show. How did that all come together to begin with? Like, how did you guys decide that this was something you were going to do?
Well, yeah, Ace, again, it was sort of like, it was even pre That Metal Show, I was still trying to work to find ways of crowbarring those two worlds into each other creatively somehow. Jim and I had gotten to know a lot of musicians because we put out these crazy CDs called Terrorizing Telemarketers and these hidden camera DVDs called Meet the Creeps. And they started to, get circulated on the rock buses. Then we met Eddie, and, we were fans of his radio show. We used to listen coming home from gigs to Eddie's show because obviously, he played the music that we loved and it wasn't playing the usual 12 rock songs on the radio every hour. And we just met up with him and started guesting on the show. And then, he had done, right after 9/11, he did a concert in New York called New York Steel. And it was to benefit some of the, the firefighters and stuff from 9/11. So we sort of took a page from that and we put on an event called Comedy Steel, where we had comedians and bands. So the comedians were me, Jim Florentine, and Jim Brewer. The 3 guys who still go out and do that kind of thing. And that's where it started. I think Eddie saw, wow, what a good combination to have, guys, with their humor, but who are legit fans. And we just we wrote a bunch of ideas on a piece of paper, went to VH1 with it, figured we'd get a free lunch out of it, never hear again. And 14 seasons later, we were still going.
Wow. Wow. And does VH1 own the rights to that, or do you guys own it? Like, could there ever be another incarnation of that show?
Ace, technically they own it because the first day we went in to the meeting, we had our three pieces of paper stapled together that we handed out to everybody in the meeting. Here's our idea for the show. We didn't have a name for it yet, but here's our ideas. And they go, okay, we'll call you back if we're interested. And 2 weeks later, they said, come back in. We took your ideas, but we made them different. We changed it up. And, this is our version of the show. And they basically just hand back the same three pieces of paper on VH1 letterhead. So that's how networks come to own shows.
That's great stuff. I mean, those seasons of the show, brought such an interesting way of talking to those artists and bringing information from them that I hadn't heard any other interviews bring out, which was really a marvelous thing. And you guys take it further when you go and you host live events and things like that, which is always a lot of fun. But getting back to the idea of rock and roll comedians in general, there's been some big ones out there, and there was a big change that I started seeing in the 80s and in the 90s. I think probably at the top of that list was Andrew Dice Clay. He was the one who took it from the clubs to the arenas and was a real rock star in his own right. He was playing sold out shows at Madison Square Gardens, telling his dirty jokes and telling his poems. So have you ever had any interaction with Andrew?
Oh yeah. I opened for Andrew for 10 years. So yeah, he's one of my closest friends, which, again, that's another part of this, which is amazing. Ace is like, my comedy hero was Dice, opening for Guns N' Roses at the Hollywood Bowl in front of 90,000 people or something, and going to see him at Madison Square Garden, with the leather jacket. And yeah, he larger than life. He was a rock star. He still is. But yeah, having, now after all these years of doing the TV show and being a comedian, that I've met all the people, that I've idolized over my life, and a lot of them become friends. And luckily, most of the people that I've run into, and I've pretty much ran into everybody in hard rock and metal, they're all way cool. So, they say never meet your heroes, but I haven't had that experience. It's actually been super positive.
Well, the one thing about Andrew that really fascinates me, and actually there are several comedians who fall into this category, but he actually is an incredibly talented actor as well as being a comedian. Even just seeing him most recently in that series that Hulu did about Pamela Anderson and Tommy Lee, and he's playing the guy who was kind of financing the whole video thing. It was a bit of a departure for him, but then again, not really. But it was so different than who he is. I thought it was a great take.
Ace, he's doing what he originally wanted to do. Now he's in his 60s. That's what he only started doing stand-up to be noticed by people in the industry. When you're an actor, it's, you're sending your headshots out and your resume and all this stuff, and maybe you get a call, maybe you don't, maybe you get an audition. So Dice just sort of went like, oh, I can do some impressions, and I could do Travolta and Jerry Lewis and all this stuff, and I'll put together a little stage act. And that's what he did. And he started out at Pips in Brooklyn, and accidentally became the biggest comedian in the world at that time. So I'm so happy for him. Like I said, he's such a close friend, and he shares all this stuff with me, and that's something that he told me a while back. He's like, this is really what I wanted to do.
Well, what I found extremely interesting about him is that there was one night it was before I lived in Los Angeles. I came down here to visit friends, and they took me to a comedy club. And as it sometimes happens, late at night after most of the acts have gone on, sometimes big name comedians come on there just to try out new material or whatever. And I was fortunate enough to see Dice that night come out and do some stuff. And having worked with bands at that point, it really struck me about how similar the two art forms are on the live stage. I mean, you have a band who has a set list and they're going to play these songs, but within the context of the live thing, there can be improvs, there can be little offshoots where they go and maybe play an extra solo, or the two guys are riffing off each other. And that was the same with Dice. I mean, he has his rickety old 69 things, that you kind of expect and want to hear from him. But all of a sudden, somebody in the crowd would do something and it would send him off on a tangent that was incredibly funny, but you realize completely unplanned and off the cuff. I mean, I've never actually seen you do your comedy, but I assume it's very similar in that. And it's got to take a lot of confidence in your own sense of humor in order to be willing to do that live and impromptu on a stage.
Well, obviously, Dice is obviously the most fearless comic that there is, going up, being one of the first ones to ever go up in front of giant crowds like that in sports arenas. And he passed that on to me, Ace. When comics are like, how do you go out and open for bands? That must be awful. I go, no. I had 10 years of training with Andrew Dice Clay. If I could score with his crowds, I could score with any crowds, because they are the hardest of the hardcore. And Dice just really, the fact that he believed in me and that he liked what I did on stage, and that and he just gave me so much great advice that made me obviously so much stronger of an act. So when the worlds started colliding with opening for bands, I was ready. It's like I did Dice crowds. I can do Twisted Sister, no problem.
Excellent. Well, I mean, certainly there's no doubting Andrew Dice Clay and his rock star status as being a comedian, but one that took it even, I think, a step further had to be Sam Kinison. I mean, this guy actually recorded songs and made rock videos and things like that. And it was always such a pleasure to see him perform, coming from that Baptist background. And he had that delivery that was so born out of that sort of, preacher on the mound kind of thing that he's up there doing. And you talk about fearless. I mean, some of the topics that man would cover. So yeah. You have to ask, I mean, when you are writing comedy and when you're preparing for your act, do you ever do things and you think, oh, no, that's just going too far?
Yes. And then I try to push it farther than that. So, it depends on sort of where the material's heading, as you're kind of getting your new set together. But no, I think anything can be funny as long as it's clever. Obviously, I like to have humor that has the surface thing and then something underneath, not necessarily a message, but maybe an extra layer of something going on underneath of it. So I think audiences, if you present it, you're clever and you're funny, audiences could accept pretty much anything. But again, Ace, I mean, Dice, Kinison, whenever I write, whenever I go out and perform, those guys are on my mind, because back then, Dice opening for Guns, Sam Kinison with the Wild Thing video with all the Sunset Strip guys in the video, Bobcat Goldthwait, who was an original rock and roll comedian, opened the first Nirvana tour in America. Like their stage presence and their energy and all that's all those guys still inspire me now. Yeah,
and a little bit back, you mentioned George Carlin as being one of your first influences. I mean, that guy amazes me to no end. I mean, he just seems to be this unending well of comedy stuff that just comes out of him, and it's just, he's absolutely brilliant in his delivery. So knowing that was one of your early influences, who were some of the other guys who really did that for you?
Yeah, I mean, again, Carlin was the first comic I ever heard, when I was like 11, and obviously I didn't get all the material, but I knew it was subversive and my parents didn't want me to hear it. So hence I seeked out as much Carlin as I could. And I used to Cheech and Chong, believe it or not. I'm not a stoner or anything. And again, when I was 11, 12 years old. I probably didn't get all the references, but I knew it was something I had to listen to quietly in my bedroom after my parents went to bed. So that was the kind of stuff that I really gravitated to. And then, of course, Dyson Kinnison came later, and now there's guys like Doug Stanhope, who's a complete outlaw comic, not necessarily a rock and roll guy, but just the sort of got that attitude. He's almost like a punk comedian, so I like guys like that. Obviously Brewer has been a friend for decades now, and I respect so much what he does, because he can be out opening for Metallica on a tour, or he could be doing an hour about his dad.
Yeah. You brought up an interesting point there, and that is that, like, I personally grew up in a household with a mother who was very, very, very Christian, and I had to hide certain records, and it was two kinds of records you had to hide. You had to hide your albums by guys like Richard Pryor and Sam Kinison and stuff, and you had to hide your Number of the Beast from Iron Maiden and your Venom records, because both of those are going to get you in deep trouble. But there is something that adds to the mystique and to the enjoyment of those records, knowing that you're not supposed to be listening to them.
Yeah, and I think that's the type of personalities that we have, where those are the kind of things that appeal to you, and those things still appeal to me in both rock and comedy. If you think about the bands, the rock and roll bands that we loved then and we still love now, what was the common thread? They were dangerous, that your parents didn't want you to listen to them. And it was the same with the comedians. And I don't know how I missed Richard Pryor, but of course, one of the great geniuses of all time, him as well, just trying to absorb all that stuff. And now it still carries through to today. I mean, the comics I still like are the edgy comics. I still love Dice. I still, Rogan, Bill Burr, all these guys out there doing their thing. Chappelle, they're to me, they're rock stars too.
Yeah. And I mean, and then even you talk about how the whole thing changed. I mean, Richard Pryor, of course, had Live on Sunset Strip, which they made into a film. But then it almost seemed like Eddie Murphy took it a step further with Raw and with Delirious, and those were big hit films in the theater. I mean, I lived in nowhere middle of Alberta, and it was coming to our theater, which had never happened before.
Yeah, I mean, those specials are still to this day household names, for lack of a better term. But you know what I mean? Everybody remembers those specials, especially the Eddie Murphy one. And it was crazy when he was thinking of making this comeback to the stage. I was like, it's a lot different than it used to be, Eddie. Everyone's got cell phone cameras and all, like if you see Chappelle, they take your phone from you, but stuff still leaks out. And, I think Eddie is in a tough spot. He became so famous for doing these family-friendly movies that for him to go back out and be that Eddie from Raw or Delirious was going to be a tough battle. And also in the world of hypersensitive audiences, which Eddie are we getting? If he's too close to the middle, he'll turn off both sides. If he's too far one way, the family-friendly people won't like him. And then if he's too family-friendly, the people like us who remember like the real edgy Eddie. So I think he gave up on that idea, but I'd go see him anything on stage
in a heartbeat. But it kind of makes me think, when we think back to those things that we saw when we were younger, you're Delirious, you're Live on Sunset Strip and all those things, they were events, and everybody that you knew had seen them or had experienced them. But it's interesting to me that in today's world of comedy and in music, because of the internet, because of technology and all that, if you have a laptop and the right interfaces, you can basically record an album in your living room. You can upload it to the internet and the world can access it. And it seems like as a result, there's just a ton of bands out there that aren't necessarily great bands, but there's a plethora of music. And by the same token, there's a lot of comedy going on out there that I've never heard of. I mean, there's so many programs that show comedy and so many clubs, and you see these rafts and rafts of comedians who you've never heard of and that nobody else you know of has ever heard of. How do you find, do you find that it still distills the best to the top? Because I mean, they seem to just fade out. You look like at Dane Cook and you look at Chappelle and things like that. I mean, they all kind of vaporized at the height of their fame. But you know, what is your opinion on that?
Well, I mean, I think people should just download my stuff and forget about all the other comedians. Then they don't have to worry about seeing a crappy comedian. They could just download all my stand-up albums on Metal Blade Records and they'll be happy. So, you know, I think, you know, obviously there's a blessing and a curse to it, right? But for the most part, for comedians, it's better because, you know, like people, you know, people go, "Oh, you're a comedian. How come you never been on Saturday Night Live?" You know, they think it's that, like, I could just walk in and to Lorne Michaels' office and go, "Hey, I'm going to be on the show this week." It's, you know, I always knew, like, I'm not an impressionist. You know, I don't do characters. You know, so I knew SNL wasn't right for me. I wasn't like sort of oddball enough to get the late night shows when they were really popular, and also I was just starting out, so. You know, so like you said, with the internet and with streaming and all that, comedians are able to find their niche. And so you didn't only have to, you could only do SNL or Letterman or the Tonight Show. Now there's a million things you could do. When I started, I would have never thought, you know, 20 years later, I'd be doing a TV show, you know, interviewing all my hard rock and heavy metal idols. You know, like that's not something that was ever even in my sights. But now, yeah, country comedians can target a certain audience, and, you know, guys like me or, you know, are associated with the rock scene, you know, can find my audience. And so I think it's mostly a good thing. But yeah, don't be fooled. I mean, just because it's on Netflix doesn't mean that it's good.
Indeed. Well, what sort of aspirations do you have? I mean, right now you're obviously a guy who goes out on a stage and performs live, but do you have aspirations to do things in television or in film and things like that?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. I mean, you can see I stole the That Metal Show logo and, and made my own podcast, That Jamieson Show. And so I've been doing that for about 3.5 years. And it's basically That Metal Show without Eddie and Jim. You know, I have rock guys come on and I interview them and talk and hopefully do something a little bit different. So I've been doing that for about 175 episodes.
Wow.
Another thing that I've been doing, so keeping these worlds colliding, right? Besides the touring and all that with the bands, is started doing this thing called punchlines and backlines. You know, I do a lot of festivals, rock cruises, rock conventions. So myself and my partner, Courtney Cronin, who's my West Coast counterpart of mine, we're like, every comedian wants to be a stand-up, right? I mean, every musician wants to be a stand-up. Let's make them one. So we started doing it. She started doing it in LA, and then we took it on the Monsters Cruise. And because I know all these guys, I go and say, "Hey, you're going to be on the Monsters of Rock cruise. Let's put together, you know, a 5-10 minute act, and you could come on, and we're going to put together a comedy show. 3 pro comics with a musician doing stand up for the first time." And it's been awesome, man. The guys, the band guys have done it, have had so much fun. I just did it this past week in Key West because they had a big rock festival down there. You know, we did, like I said, the Monsters of Rock cruise. We did it. We've had Kip Winger come up there and do stand up. We've had a bunch of guys do it. So that's been really fun. We get on a FaceTime with them. They tell us some funny stories from their past. We kind of distill it down and edit it for the stage, and they go up and do it. So, you know, again, keeping that connection alive in different ways.
That's amazing. I'm gonna have to go on YouTube and check that out. But I gotta say, just as a personal story, there was something, the first time I ever met you in person was one of the most interesting encounters I've ever had with a person ever.
Oh, no. Oh, what did I do?
So check this out. It was, we were on tour. I was with Thin Lizzy at the time. We were on tour across the United States. It was the first tour that we had done since Adam and I had taken over managing. And we were in, I think it was the Starlight in New Jersey or something like that. And
Starland, yeah.
Yeah, excuse me, yes. And Eddie had reached out and said he wanted to come to the show, and so we put him on the guest list. And he came early because of course he wanted to hang out with the band guys. And I remember when he arrived, he called me and I brought him backstage, and I kind of said, well, did any of the guys from the show come with you? Like, did Jim or Jameson come? And he's like, oh yeah, he's downstairs with the singer from Accept. And I was like, oh, okay, I got to go meet him, right? So I walked downstairs and I saw you and the singer from Accept and another fellow, and you were kind of in a three-way circle having a conversation. And I didn't want to be rude and interrupt, so I kind of stood off for a little bit until there was a natural break in the conversation. And I said, excuse me, but I wanted to take a moment to introduce myself and to meet you. And you looked at me and you went, Ace Trump. And I went, he goes, I said, you know who I am? He says, know who you are. And you started reading off basically my CV. You said, you did the overnight sensation website for Motorhead in the newsletter, and then you did this, and now you're managing Thin Lizzy. And I was like, and every word that came out of your mouth, my eyes got bigger, and I was like, this is the weirdest experience ever. That somebody on your level knew who the hell I was. So.
Well, because I'm still a fan, and I hope I never lose that, because the joy of being a fan and trying to seek out information about these artists that we love so much. Let's face it, Motorhead, until maybe the last 15 years of their career, didn't get tons of press. I mean, they got no radio, and Lemmy being literally my idol. I was always hungry to find out stuff about them, and they obviously really relied on people like you to help spread the word. I mean, I'm wearing my go to bed with Motorhead shirt right now. So, you can never take the kid out of me, Ace. I'm still that 15-year-old kid in my bedroom listening to Iron Fist and Kiss Destroyer and Thin Lizzy Live and Dangerous. I think once you lose that, then you lose that passion. I don't know what you do.
I feel so lucky to have had the relationship that I had with Lemmy, being friends with him for almost 30 years, and the things that we had been through together and the experiences I had with him are memories I'll never lose. I mean, I remember him. I was in LA and he asked me to come down to the Rainbow and meet him at lunchtime, and it was just I didn't realize the Rainbow wasn't open. Of course, they opened it for him though, so it was just me and him in there. And the Rainbow has this little CD player right above the desk at the entranceway that they play music in the place for. And I don't remember what band was playing, but it was some lame pop band, and he visibly got upset. He actually stormed up to the desk, and he looked through the rack and he found a copy of Bastards, and he put Bastards in, and we stood there because I told him at that time Bastards had only ever come out in Germany on CD. It was a very hard album to find, and I had never found one for my own collection. And we sat there at the bar, and as each song came on, he told me stories about it when he was writing, what happened, all this stuff. It was one of the most magnificent experiences of my life. And then the CD ends and the changer goes back to that other disc, and he just snaps. He goes, takes the disc out, puts it back in the jewel case, grabs my hand, puts it in my hand, and says, here, you take it. At least somebody will listen to it, will enjoy it.
Yeah. Well, Bastards, one of my top 5 Motorhead albums for sure. I got to know Lem a little bit, towards the end. I was so excited that he took a liking to me. He used to come on that metal show, and I didn't care if I was invisible to him. I just didn't want to say or do anything so he wouldn't like me, because he's truly my idol. I've lived my life by Motorhead lyrics. A lot of the times, like comedy, don't let them bastards grind you down. Like that, like those things I keep in my head. And there's so many Lemmyisms, that obviously people know of and could look up on the internet. But I just didn't want him to not like me. That's all I cared about. And I think because I left him alone, then he was sort of intrigued, and then we were doing that metal show in LA, and he was in his dressing room, and I was walking past to go to mine, and I hear, Don, come in here, sit down, have a drink. And that was my first Jack and Coke with Lemmy. And it was like, check that out off the heavy metal bucket list. And
Well,
I don't want to die tomorrow, but if I do, I had a Jack and Coke with Lemmy.
You know, Lemmy loved comedians and comedy. I mean, I can't tell you the number of hours I sat there watching Monty Python or the Ruddles with him or things like that. And even I remember at one point, he got tapped by another comedian, Jim Norton.
Yeah.
He got this contract to do a show for HBO, and I think it was called Down and Dirty. It was supposed to be. Yeah, it was supposed to be comedians doing their bluest material and being given a venue to do that. And he tapped Lemmy to be like his band leader. And I remember going, Lemmy phoning me up after they were done. I think they did like 4 episodes or 6 episodes. And he wanted me to go to the meeting with him and Todd Singerman at the offices of Jim Norton's agent. And we were going to watch these videos together and give our opinions, and I mean, they were awesome. I wish that series had continued. I mean, it was such a brilliant idea. But yeah, Lem loved comedians and comedy. He was, if you've never seen him do his impression of Peter Boyle's Young Frankenstein monster doing Putting on the Ritz, you've missed out. Okay.
I unfortunately did miss out, although I will say, because I don't drink liquor, so there's probably some hazy moments drinking Jack and Coke with Lemmy that I don't remember anymore. But the one thing he turned me on to big time was Derek and Clive from the 70s in England, which was Dudley Moore and Peter Cook, and they get high and drunk and basically improv these comedy albums, and there's some amazingly brilliant stuff in there. So that's one of the things Lemmy turned me on to that I still listen to this day, and still cracks me up, and also still makes me think about him and how much we miss him.
Indeed. So, well, I mean, I think that the relationship between comedy and rock and roll is a match made in heaven. It's going to continue for the foreseeable future. And I'm really glad that my absolute passion for music allowed me to meet you, and we became friends about 10 years ago or so. And I want to thank you very much for taking the time to come chat about this with me, because it's one of my favorite topics. So I really appreciate you being here today.
No, and likewise, Ace. Again, you know, what you did for Motorhead back in the day when they were really counting on people to step up and do it, and you did it from the heart, and that's why you're where you are now. That's why, you know, I'm still alive and kicking out there. You know, you can see, like, when we get talking about this, I get animated, I get passionate, because I still love it. I'm still a fan at heart, and I think people have accepted the combination of those worlds. They kind of get it now, and I think people are more open-minded in general. So I think it works out great for everyone. And hopefully I'll be back on the road with somebody this spring and summer. And other than that, everyone check me out on my socials, Don Jamieson, and come say hi sometime.
Yeah, and we'll put a link to his podcast, That Jamieson Show, down in the notes down here. Be sure to check it out, because it is really cool. So thanks again, Don, and thank all of you out there for watching and checking us out. You can always send your feedback to louderwithace@gmail.com. We're also on the Patreon platform if you want to go check out our after hours show there. And thank you again, Don. We'll talk to you next time.
I'll see you later, Ace. Thank you, dude.